This is a relay project.
It's your weekly fill of news and politics. Party All the Time starts now. Here's Vicky Mochama.
I hope you don't mind. I just got to put on some finishing touches, but we'll get to the show. In the meantime, I'm going to tell you a story. So the other day, this last Wednesday, my mom came home with a message for my dog, and like a stern message. She was not playing around. Let me explain. So my dog is this beautiful capital B Black Greyhound born and raised in West Virginia, United States of America. And that's where he was born, and that's where he was raised, and that's where he was a racer, actually. He wasn't very much good at racing, and so I adopted him, and he's with me, and he's perfect, and he's beautiful. And really, like, him and my mom have a pretty good relationship. He stands up for her whenever she comes into the house, and she, for her part, allows him to live in the house, which for most Kenyans, that's sacrilege. So clearly she loves and respects this dog, except that on this day, she had something she really wanted to make super clear to him. And you've got to see this. She brought him a dog bandana that says Canada and has maple leaves all over it. Yeah, this is a dog bandana, un bandana pour chien. Listen, my mother, the woman who would not allow any of me and my siblings in our youth to wear anything resembling gang paraphernalia, let alone a freaking bandana, this is the same woman who's now telling a dog who is 100% asleep, by the way, that his patriotism is lacking. Oh, and she's being very practical too, by the way. She knows you can't just like tie a bandana onto a dog and be done with it. Oh, yeah. She brought buttons. Yeah, she thought of all of it. Clearly, she was feeling some type of way that day. And in fact, something had rattled her. That Wednesday, that beautiful sunny afternoon in Toronto, Donald Trump, it wasn't in Toronto, but Donald Trump had announced 25% tariffs on all cars not made in the United States of America. And it got to her. Well, that's politics, baby. Look, I don't know if my dog's going to be wearing a maple leaf print Canadian bandana. I'm not sure it's his aesthetic. Like, really, florals in spring? How novel. But it is spring in Canada. And this spring, we are doing some politics up here. As of last Sunday, there is a federal election. If you are eligible, and you can check at elections.ca, you are going to the polls. And I bet you're wondering, what even are our options? Well, that's what this show is here to figure out. Welcome to Party All the Time. I'm Vicky Mochama, and I'm going to spend the next few weeks getting answers. Really, what are our options? And more questions like, who is that man? And what are these people doing? And where is that? And who all going to be there? As for who I am, I'm a writer and journalist, which means I have been a loudmouth and question asker for over a decade now. I'm hardly a neutral observer in this game, never have been. Like, the mother who has feelings about doggy patriotism does not raise unopinionated children. But I still want to know what is going on. And I need smart people to help me understand. To help me figure that out every week, I invite some pretty smart people and many of my most available friends to talk it all through. Welcome to Party All the Time. This week, I am joined by iPolitics reporter Kady O'Malley, managing editor of thehub.ca, Harrison Lowman, and comedian and writer of the Baking Plus Politics newsletter, The Final Proof, Lauren Mitchell. Welcome, everyone, to episode 1.
Hello. Hey, happy episode.
Hi, how's it going? Are you guys going to put any patriotism-related paraphernalia on your pets?
I do have to rename my dog's breed because she is a Boston Terrier. Now, she was not born in Boston, but known as sort of the American gentleman, and she's also a female, but we'll leave that aside. Anyway, she's been rebranded as a Muskoka Terrier because that's where she was born.
That's adorable. That's very sweet.
You have to watch the American dog allegiances, right? Because, when the tanks go over the border, these little things could turn on us, and they're already in our homes. They're like sleeper agents. So,
Oh yeah, my dog is not a patriot to this country. I think he's very much a MAGA Republican, and he's just ready to steamroll this country into submission.
I have a cat, and I think cats are truly stateless.
That is very true.
that is true. That is true.
Which is aligned with my general political situation.
I also like, Vicky, that you didn't use y'all. You said who all. I think that was very, purposeful, and I thank you for it. You're a good Canadian.
Thank you. I'm glad I have that on record. Someone saying I'm a good Canadian.
Excellent Canadian. Very good Canadian.
Yeah, they're going to play this in court someday.
We call this section the brain trust. As of Sunday, the country has been plunged into a national federal election. The parties, who weren't really that secret about campaigning for hearts and minds to begin with, are now firmly within their right to knock on doors, host rallies, bother a bunch of people eating at a local diner, and do all of the things it takes to get someone elected. At the end of election 2025, millions of Canadians will choose a representative of their respective ridings. After calling the election on Sunday, Liberal Party leader and newly minted Prime Minister Mark Carney jetted off to Gander, Newfoundland. Meanwhile, Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre and NDP Party leader Jagmeet Singh legged it to the Greater Toronto area to get their messages across. Meanwhile, in Montreal, the Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet and the Green Party's co-leaders launched their campaigns in separate venues, of course. That would have been a bit uncomfortable. Political types call this moment going to the hustings, which frankly makes it sound like there's one family called the Hustingses and they're going to decide everything, which would be convenient if undemocratic. Like Diane and Marco Hustings are probably great people, but I think I and the rest of us would like a say, and a say we will get. But what are all these people even saying as they travel across the country? Kady, you are a parliamentary reporter supreme. You know all these details. I want to talk about what's happened right as we've been recording, which is Trump's tariffs on non-US automakers, which seem like they're going to do just more than upset my mother and my dog's couture. What happens when something like this hits in the middle of an election campaign?
So there is actually, so I'm sure we all know, but I'll just restate it. The Prime Minister, Mark Carney, is still the Prime Minister. The cabinet is still in place. We still have a government. We are not governmentless. We are not in a state of anarchy. However, when the campaign is on, there's this thing called the caretaker model. And basically what it means is government just sort of goes on autopilot. It, carries out regular routine business, but it doesn't do anything. There's actually a list of sort of criteria, anything that's routine, non-controversial, or agreed to in general with the other parties and can be easily reversed by a new government that came in. However, obviously, sometimes things come up that require the actual people who make up the government to come back and, do a little bit of their actual work as ministers. Usually when that happens during a campaign, it's something like extreme weather. Like if you suddenly have floods in Saskatchewan, you might actually need to bring the cabinet back to talk about getting aid to Saskatchewan. And everyone takes off their campaign hats and puts on their minister's hats and does what needs to be done. And then they go right back out, to visit the hustings. In this particular case, I think everyone knew the possibility of a tariff announcement midway through the election was a virtual certainty. So we knew this was going to happen. I think a lot of us figured it might be closer to April 2nd, which is, as Donald Trump says, Liberation Day. We're expecting a whole new wave. But because of that, they had a plan in place that was developed before the election was called. As soon as the announcement was made about the auto tariffs, the Mark Carney shifted from Liberal leader to Prime Minister mode and headed back to Ottawa, meeting with cabinet, figuring out, are there any last minute changes we need to make to the response that we're going to put forward? The cabinet will decide what they're going to do, sign off on it, and then they go back to the campaign mode. And I suspect, given the situation we're in, this is not the last time that's going to happen in this campaign. It's entirely possible we'll have to do this again.
What is this, talking about the broader impact on the campaign, Mark Carney gets to look and is prime ministerial. What are the other parties saying? How do they react in a moment like this? Because there is still a question of what they're going to deliver or what they're going to promise to Canadians when a moment like this unfolds.
So a really good example of that, actually, what we saw as soon as the announcement was made, the other party leaders did come out fairly quickly. Jagmeet Singh, quite conveniently, was actually in Windsor, which is, of course, auto manufacturing central, and was able to kind of, give his comments in that context. He even stuck around for the next day to meet with union leaders about it. Pierre Poilievre was actually at a rally in Quebec City, not the ideal location, but was also able to give sort of a statement. But everyone has to be kind of on their best behavior in a sense, because Mark Carney, as you say, he's prime minister when he's doing this. He's not Liberal leader, so he has to keep the partisanship as little as possible, or it's going to get people's backs up. The other party leaders are free to be as partisan as they want, but I think a lot of them do want to take a kind of a nuanced approach because they don't want to be seen as somehow, against Team Canada. Although, I mean, to be fair, Jagmeet Singh was, had plenty to say about all the things he thought Mark Carney should have done before calling an election. But again, I don't think he's going to come out and object to any actions that are taken to support auto workers. So yeah, it's awkward for everyone. I think it's more difficult for the government simply because they really have to be careful not to be partisan. Like Mark Carney cannot be wearing, a vote Liberal hat. He's got to look like a prime minister. He's got to act like a prime minister until he's, gets back on that campaign bus and goes back to being Mark Carney, the Liberal leader.
Does this have an impact on any of their policies or their campaigning that they've been doing so far? They've been sending messages around tax cuts, around program supports or program changes. How does a moment like this influence the messaging going forward?
So this is another good example of, in this case, if you look at particularly the New Democrat and the Liberal campaigns, they have very much been touching on the issues going on with the U.S., specifically the need to support workers. Both of them have been putting that really front and center, and it does allow them to take breaking news and sort of incorporate that into the way they're presenting stuff. The Conservatives have taken a bit of a different strategy and have kind of been going on a separate narrative. They are tying stuff back to this notion of a strong Canada and a strong economy, but immediately segue to things like, and then we'll, eliminate the rest of the carbon tax, and then we'll do all these things that they were going to do and were in their platform anyway. So far, they don't seem to be making it quite as much a sort of core component of their campaign. That could change, but both the New Democrats and the Liberals have really been keeping it very central for at least the opening week of the campaign.
In this opening week, if you could help us out, what have they been saying to voters before Trump made his announcement? What's the pitch coming from the different parties? And I'm not saying tell me who to vote for and why, but who should I vote for and why?
Because I don't know. I have no idea who you or anyone else should vote for. I am, just notoriously nonpartisan on things. However, in terms of the messaging, for the first couple of days, it was kind of bizarrely, as far as I could tell, all about tax cuts, but not like big tax cuts. It was, both the Liberals and the Conservatives came out with their plan to basically take a small amount off of the minimum of the rate that is charged on the lowest income bracket, which, to be fair, will be a tax reduction for, people. I think it's like $400 for the Liberals per person and maybe $900 for the Conservatives. So it is money and, it would be helpful, but it's not like saying, hey, I'm going to drop the GST 3 points or something like that. So that was kind of the focus of the first couple of days. You also had the New Democrats putting their tax policies out there, which are basically taking the GST off a whole bunch of essential items, that kind of thing, and raising the basic exemption for personal income taxes is also boring. I'll probably falling asleep, but that is what happened over the first couple of days of the campaign. It was weirdly specific and not sweeping. And generally, you expect a campaign to start with the big picture. Here is my vision for Canada. And then the things like, here are the specific programs I'm putting forward. Those usually follow later or in the platform, which is usually released in the last couple of weeks of the campaign. I find it interesting that this time, all the parties seem to be starting with slightly smaller announcements, although the Liberals did actually, just the day before the auto tariffs came in, quite conveniently, announce their plan specifically to help the auto industry with this strategic fund that would support workers, that would make the supply chain more Canadian to avoid tariffs and all of that stuff that they're really hoping will make them look like they're the ones that Canadians should vote for. But yeah, beyond that, it's been a weird start to the campaign, which is honestly probably also because They have, in reality, yeah, the election started on Sunday, but they've been in campaign mode since last fall because everyone knew it was coming. And we didn't even have a House of Commons for the first couple of months of the year because of the Liberal leadership race. So it made official what was already underway. I wonder now if the parties aren't, yes, technically we're only on, first week of the campaign, but they've already given a lot of their good stuff and they got another 3 weeks to go.
I want to bring in our two other guests here, Harrison and Lauren. Like, Harrison, you watch this as managing editor. You get to see the big picture. What have you taken away from the campaign so far?
I think that the more that Carney gets to appear in front of a podium looking prime ministerial, the more like the party operatives behind him are sort of licking their lips, right? We heard recently
a disgusting
that
visual image.
it's just like saliva dripping. But we heard that conversation with Danielle Smith and Breitbart like a few weeks ago. It came out recently, but it was taped a few weeks ago, where she was saying things like, I'm telling U.S. officials to press pause on the tariffs. I don't know if a liberal party official had meetings with Trump, I feel like they'd be saying, we want play to be pressed, because every time Carney looks prime ministerial and can react to Trump's tariffs, I think it really helps the liberals, right? The conservatives are saying this is just a fresh touch of red paint on a rusty hull of an old liberal ship that's got all the same, I don't know, what do we call them? First mates helping to run the ship. I don't really know how ships work.
I don't always have to with nautical metaphors. Yeah. I start strong and then I just fall apart.
The turbulent churning waters of the Canadian electorate getting through. Anyway, and then who else do we have? Carney's trying to look like a technocrat. He's trying to do the whole, Vicky, you and I used to work at TVO, Bill Davis, bland works. Like, it's working for Carney so far.
Bill Davis was a former premier of Ontario.
Exactly. And he won year after year, and he did it by just being kind of boring. And it's interesting, like, just to compare Carney's talk of, Trump wants to break us so America can own us, versus Poilievre, who has to take a much more softened approach and only use words like Trump's moves are unjustified.
Knock it off. Knock it off is his new thing. Yeah, which is like what you say to your dog if it's like trying to eat food off the table. It's not something you say to a country that's, launching a hostile act against you. But yeah.
Yes, he has to be very careful there. And then I feel like Mr. Singh is just like, guys, I box. Check me out. And then the Greens are just like, hey, did you know we have two leaders? That's kind of interesting. Does that pique your interest? So that's kind of, I'm being playful, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, Lauren, I'd love to hear what you've seen so far in the campaign. What has drawn your attention?
Yeah, I mean, as you're one of your most available friends, surely people are clamoring to hear my political thoughts. But just learning this week that the Green Party has two leaders. So that's fascinating to me. I think
Elizabeth May and Jonathan Pedneau are the two leaders. They co-lead the party, which is a sort of a novel form, but we've seen it elsewhere in Quebec. Quebec Solidaire had a co-leadership model. So it's not totally uncommon, but we haven't seen it at the federal stage.
Yeah, that's so fun. What are we going to have? Two prime ministers? That could be cute.
How would they do that?
One person has to be vice prime minister.
Although Elizabeth May she is allowing Jonathan Pedneau to be the face of the campaign. So there's not going to be two Green leaders on the debate stage, kind of tragically, because that would be sort of fun. It's going to be Jonathan Pedneau, because he is the face. Elizabeth May is the co-leader. So, in the universe, the alternate timeline where the Greens actually win a majority, I think it would be Prime Minister Jonathan Pedneau, just for the record.
Fascinating. I think Mark Carney's going to regret ever getting into politics. He had such a cushy life before this, like moving his finances around to countries with little to no tax. You know what I mean? Like, you're gonna rue the day you decided to become the leader of the Liberal Party. I think you're
underestimating boomers. Men want, for power and a little like sign outside of their mahogany door. Anyway, go ahead.
He already had that. He was like the running the banks over in England. Like, yeah. I mean, I just feel like that's a better. I don't know. no one's giving me these jobs. I don't know what's the better job to have. But yeah, I think he might have some regrets going forward, is what I would say. Yeah, everyone is doing what they do, and it's a short election, I think. So, like, to Kady's point, we've all known this election is coming for a really long time, but the actual election cycle where they're sort of allowed to go out and be like, yeah, put their hats on and say, I'm kissing babies, I'm trying to get you to vote for me. Like, we only have 3 weeks. So for people who are just tuning in, it's kind of like, okay, well, let's get down to brass taxes, as it were, which I think is kind of interesting. And then, the whole idea of having to deal with America, and having the funny thing to me is the premier's coming in and saying, oh, I'm talking to American politicians. Like, that's not in your job description. Why is Danielle Smith talking to Trump's people? It does, like, what are you talking about? Like, that, have you read your job description? Because it is not doing foreign policy as far as last time I checked. Anyways.
The conservatives would say it's because, they're filling a vacuum created by a lack of action from the, the federal government.
Of course. Yeah, we needed Danielle Smith more than anything.
But Lauren, don't you love just turning on MSNBC, Fox, every news channel, and you get to see your premier there chattering away? Because
we have had Prime Minister. Torontonians have been in a unique situation where they have both Mayor Doug Ford, Premier Doug Ford, and Prime Minister Doug Ford as their leader, which I think, he should just make it official at some point. But
I think he's got his eye on what the Conservatives are going to do in this particular race, and he may be thinking on exactly those lines for a future next move.
Ford City, Ford Nation, Ford Province. Yeah. There you go.
Well,
Canada brought to you by Ford.
The different Ford, the other fascist Ford family, yeah.
I want to talk about some of the stories we have seen that haven't been around tariffs or dealing with Trump. The Globe and Mail reported Tuesday that CSIS learned that Indian proxies were involved in raising money and organizing within the South Asian community for Pierre Poilievre during the leadership race, which he won handily. There's no kind of suggestion in the article that and their involvement influenced the outcome. He won with 68% of the vote among conservatives, but it did bring up the question of he didn't know this information because he still continues to decline to have the necessary security clearances. He argues that having them would bar him from making important criticisms of the government. And there are those who say, that may have been true at one point. I don't know if that still holds true today, especially when we're heading into a very highly securitized environment around our election. I guess my question is, why doesn't he have it? Should he get it? And is it a big deal to Canadians? Does this matter? Harrison, I want you to touch on this.
I definitely don't think it's on people's radar. Similar to like the minor tax adjustments that Kady was talking about them announcing earlier this week. People aren't going to be picking up a placard around this. What do I think? I think that it's been proven through the various, investigations and leaks through the intelligence community, the Globe, that there's issues as it relates to China, probably with the Liberal Party, and then maybe on the conservative side as it relates to India. Frankly, I'm surprised the candidate that this occurred with wasn't Patrick Brown, given his, he's got deep linkages to India. He's personal friends with Modi. He's got a bunch of pictures with him. I think he went elephant riding with Modi's people in India, would take trips there. Anyway, so Poilievre, I don't know. The only people that know the real reason are him and his close circle of advisors. He, and Kady knows this better than me, insists that if he got these briefings, it would mean he then couldn't come out from those briefings and give a press conference where he would challenge the Liberals as it relates to intelligence. He also, floated the idea, I think it was yesterday, that in those meetings, any personal information that he would give up could then be used against him. Kady, you can explain this.
I
guess his party.
His answers become more nonsensical as this goes on. My own personal theory, I'm basing this on no inside information, but just sort of watching how this whole subplot with the security clearance has unfolded. I think when he initially declined the briefing, it was reflexive. And it was because he did think that politically it was better to be on the outside and not someone with the inside info. I suspect that as more happened and as the story developed, he probably did realize that this was not actually a particularly good decision. Not only is it incorrect that he wouldn't be able to criticize the government, he would absolutely still be able to do that. But as the Globe and Mail story kind of highlighted, it means that if there is information and concerns about a potential candidate, a potential staffer in his office, he might actually be hurting his party by not having that information. And I suspect that he knows this, but he's in too far. He pushed that line that he wouldn't do it so far. He keeps doubling and tripling down. He can't reverse course now. It would look ludicrous because he's just made such a big deal about it. Had he declined the security clearance and then like a week later said, on reflection, I think that the responsible thing to do would be to get it, we would not be having this conversation right now. But because it keeps coming up and he keeps digging his heels in, it does become, and you do have these like weird conspiracy theories that, why does he want the clearance? What skeletons does he have in his closet? I'm gonna guess none. But I think that, again, if he could go back in time and maybe change that particular decision, it would make his life a lot easier. But he can't because he is not a guy who ever wants to be seen changing his mind on anything ever.
Yes. I think go ahead, Lauren.
Oh, I was just going to say, call me when this has the whiff of the Eric Adams Turkey situation. This is like the most boring foreign
Canada. It's Canada. All of our politics are boring.
Yeah,
they're like well, nobody
Turkish
knew and it didn't work
paying
anyway.
For things for the mayor of New York.
Yeah, I mean,
I love a distance from a nominations or leadership race in the Conservative Party.
I love our politics, but yeah, they do not compare in terms of spectacle and show to pretty much anywhere in the world, and we just have to live with that.
It's so niche, but you can even sense sometimes when you read stuff, written by our colleagues that we want it to be spicy.
Yeah.
Like, can we put a bit more pepper on this? We try. God, we have no spices here.
Even that Globe and Mail article, they were like, well, in the end, it didn't really have any effect at all. And I was like, okay,
and he didn't know.
So yeah, he didn't know and it didn't work. So what are we talking about here? Like, I need someone to be sending an email like, does Turkish Airlines fly to Cuba directly? That's interesting. Something for us to learn.
Speaking of a lack of spice and sizzle, let's talk about Mark Carney's last few weeks. He has been on a road trip. He went to Europe for a little while, and he is in the process of engaging more deeply with his French language. But, on the campaign trail this week, while he was in Nova Scotia speaking about different candidates' backgrounds, he miscited the name and reference for one of the women there, who is a Montrealer named Nathalie Provost, who is a survivor of the École Polytechnique massacre, and she's a gun control advocate. And he sort of flubbed all of this. But, how is he doing as prime minister? How is he taken to that chair, as it were? And, since becoming the liberal leader, how has he been on the campaign trail? We talked a little bit about how he's a bit of a technocrat. He speaks like, in a very particular cadence. And there's lots
of this. Lots of like.
Yes, he does do the sort of like hand gestures that are not, you can't point a finger in politics, and people always sort of kind of curl their hands in really funny ways. But he is, I kind of contrast him with this week. Jagmeet Singh released a video doing one of the sort of get ready with me style videos where he's tying up his hair into his turban. I don't think we're going to get skincare regime with Mark Carney. There's a sort of lack of pizzazz that they're going for. Is that, do we think, intentional?
I want to see Mark Carney in one of those red light masks. You know what I mean? The scary ones that
like
you
the
wear.
LED mask?
Yeah. And him doing like, let me talk about the intricacies of our tax plans.
I think, I don't know. I think bland works, right? Like, as a campaigner, there's, from what I've heard, there's definitely a juxtaposition between him and Trudeau. Trudeau was like an unbelievable campaigner, and he could go at a million miles a minute. I think Carney, they're rolling back the events a little bit because it is his first time, and you can sense he's exhausted. The other day, he was like going through questions, and he clearly wanted it to be over. And he was like, "Really? Is there another like local reporter? Quick, could we like get this over and done with, please?" he's got his, Singh is doing his Get Ready With Me. He got his Mike Myers moment, though. Carney did, albeit all the references were from like 1960s, all the Canadiana stuff.
Yeah,
so
so
that
the
seems a
Liberals
bit dated.
did release, that video with Mike Myers and Mark Carney by a hockey rink. I genuinely had no idea what they were talking about. That was not English to me.
Vicky, they could not create a lab. Like, you were so not the audience for this.
Yeah, that was content that was designed.
I'm surprised you even got it in your feed.
Head.
Like, it was even fed to you because you're just like the anti. Yeah.
I mean, in general, I think the theory the Liberals are going on, and a lot of people think maybe there is something to it, is that given like everything that is happening, particularly south of the border, but just in general, the Canadians are actually, they kind of want boring, that they want some guy that they can mentally imagine hiring to do their taxes or to, restructure their mortgage or something like that. They don't want excitement necessarily. They want someone who looks solid and competent. And that is the image that they're trying to project. I just have to defend Mark Carney a little bit here in that, okay, yes, all the leaders have been doing campaign stuff for months now. He had literally just come out a leadership campaign. Like, he was on the road for 5 weeks running for the Liberal leadership. And he was doing these events every day. The man probably is exhausted. I would be exhausted. I would have been gone 2 weeks ago.
He's been preparing for this for like 10 years too, though. Like,
well, true, but it's different.
It's been a dream from across the pond.
I think it's easier to dream about it sometimes than to actually live it in reality, because it is exhausting. Politics is like tiring, weird, unpredictable work. It is like wandering onto a shop floor and making small talk with people that might hate you. Because who knows, they've just been herded in and told to, pose for a camera. Like, so many elements of it are so artificial that I think it does become a very surreal experience to be at the center of it. I mean, I've never been a campaigner myself, but I do have a little bit of sympathy just because I sometimes look at what they're going through and I'm like, man, I would so need to recharge for about 3 weeks after doing one of these events.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, go ahead, Lauren.
Well, I was just going to say, I think there's something interesting too about like Trudeau had all these people who, I mean, I'm not a fan of Justin Trudeau. I've never voted for the Liberal Party. I'm not going to start now. But people had the people who hated Trudeau were, can I swear?
Yes, of course.
The fuck Trudeau crowd, right? They're big signs. They're all like psychosexually obsessed with him or whatever. I feel like Mark Carney coming in and having to flip that image of like, people hated that we had a prime minister that was like relatively handsome. I feel like a lot of straight men in this country felt really threatened by that. And so I also think the Mark Carney thing is let's see if we can have a non-pretty boy.
I don't know. I think Carney's pretty handsome. Like, I'm going to put that forward.
He's like,
you're saying Mark Carney could get it.
Yeah.
He's if we're ranking, it's jag meat, he's the hottest. Like, we're going down from there. But I do think there's something about that. Like, he has to come in and be like, okay, you guys were like, fuck Trudeau, but like, what about me? Like, I was a banker.
I think Trudeau was so performative and so empathetic and so tear-filled that, like, I don't know, some are finding relief in the, steady hand at the till, more boring guy. I also want to know where all the fuck Trudeau signs are. Are they just in storage lockers now?
Oh, they've gone. I'm sure they will somehow be repurposed. Carney can fit over Trudeau if you're doing a paint job. Like, you just make the letters a little bit bigger. It is not that hard.
Can I just put a theory on the table? So at the Hub, we created this kind of this term. There's actually popping up now in conservative messaging about the lost decade. Like,
the lost Liberal decade?
Yeah, lost productivity, Canada standing on the world stage. And I think the people that feel it most, if you agree that it's a thing, are a lot of young people who can't get a home, are in university but forced to work another job so that they can pay their way through university and afford to live in major cities. And
or
boomers,
to a boomer talk about how her dog lacks patriotism.
But who's Carney doing well with? A lot of boomers, a lot of older people who may not have felt the lost decade as acutely, who are listening to these Mike Myers, 1960s CBC references. And you're seeing in the polls, and maybe Kady's on top of this more than I am, younger people kind of sticking with the conservatives a bit more, and the older crowd inching further towards the liberals, and finding sort of security behind Carney. I don't know. Is that a thing? Is it not?
Young men are staying more to the conservative side. Women who, if you go back 2 months, younger women and younger men, I'm talking the 18 to 35 set, they were all, both genders were definitely leaning more conservative.
Yeah.
It's fair to say that the women's side of that, the women between 18 and 35 have made a marked shift to the liberals. And the dudes are still there. And if they show up to vote, I'm not going to say it's a majority. It's maybe the conservatives pull off a minority here, but this is the weird dynamic we've got here. And I don't think we've really processed it as people who obsess over elections. We went from a race where it was literally looking like the conservatives were going to win like 250 of 300 and how many years? 343 seats. And now we're looking at best case scenario for the conservatives right now would be a minority. And that's very much not really looking like it's going to happen. That is a stunning thing to happen in 2 months. Like, we're living it, so we don't really appreciate it. We are going to next year or later this year look back and say, holy crap, that was a weird election. Like, what the hell happened there? Because I've never seen anything like this in terms of the numbers shifting. It is jaw-dropping.
I think you saw that too in Ford making sure that we had a provincial election before, because, the Ontario cons have never been in power when the Fed cons have been in power, and vice versa. And so I think he understood weirdly, or not Doug himself, but the people who work around him sort of understood that they needed to have the election so they could come in with another majority. And then whatever happens at the federal level happens.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by the sort of gender split and how it's reversed under Carney, and young women, especially now, are more likely to vote liberal and feel a sense of trust in the new leader. And there's been small changes in some of the polls showing that even young men are now more likely to vote Carney. It's not maybe closer more to the like 35 plus range, but there's been a shift, and it's sizable, or it's significant enough that there is some sort of gender differences that we're seeing across people's polling preferences. But whether or not you can organize a group of men to get to a location together on time and make the right decision, if I could do it.
Well, and this is
you'd be prime minister.
This is the whole thing about riding politics. Is it's also not like there are ridings made up entirely of women. So it's always going to be, there are very few demographics where you're going to have one of them control what's going to happen in a riding. It's always going to be, a bit of a split. I think that some are more so than others. Like, in theory, ridings near universities where you've got a lot of young people, maybe they're more likely to go more progressive, but it doesn't always work out that way. Canadian politics is very weird. I mean, the electorate seems to kind of know what it's doing in some ways. Like, strategically, they're actually pretty good at getting what they think they want, but it is extremely difficult to actually predict what's going to happen. And this is the frustrating part about polls, is they show us these breakdowns, but unless you're actually doing riding by riding polls, you really just don't know how it's going to play out.
All right. This is called With All Due Disrespect. This is our chance for our guests and myself to shout out someone, something, somewhere, someplace, somehow that has earned their ire or their respect. Now, we do this with a lot of grace. You can swear, of course, but don't get me sued. And also don't get me sued. Those are the two rules for this segment. Now, who wants to kick us off? Lauren, do you have somebody for us?
Yeah, I do. I have chosen the disrespect route, as is my way as a hater, a lifelong hater. My ire and my disrespect is currently facing directly at every Cybertruck I see, sullying the beautiful streets of our province's capital that I am privileged to live in. I hate these ugly trucks. I thought they were going. I thought they got recalled or whatever. And I just have to look at them all the time. I saw a white one the other day.
They're everywhere in Toronto.
Awful. I didn't even know you could get a color that wasn't that disgusting gunmetal silver. Somehow more horrific in the white. The lack of taste, first of all, like the lack of taste, the lack of beauty, the lack of glamour, the lack of smooth edges. Like I just don't understand why I have to look at the Cybertruck. This is an American problem. This is not a me problem. I don't live in America. I'm not gonna live in America. Probably maybe never gonna go to America again, all things considered. And I just feel like I shouldn't have to look at the Cybertruck. Like that's not my problem. That's not my ministry. That's not my circus. And I resent every time I see one. It's like I resent every time in the city of Toronto that I see a big hulking vehicle that could easily run over children without the blink of an eye. 90-year-old women, anyone can get hit by a car in Toronto. It's really fair game. But I hate the big SUVs anyways. Anytime I see a Hummer, an Escalade, whatever, I'm like, what are we doing here? But the Cybertrucks they're just making me extra mad. So all my disrespect, my anger, my ire, I'm funneling it at those trucks and honestly, more specifically, any moron that would buy one. I hope that
I was going to ask, is this targeted at the truck itself or the owners of said truck?
Oh, it's both. They are, again, psychosexually connected. That's the theme today.
This is such a sexy podcast. My God.
Yeah, this is what I'm aiming for, the Harlequin romance of Canadian podcasting.
That's what happens when you just bring a random non-politics person on. I'm like, has anyone considered Freud?
That's a great one. I don't enjoy those trucks, mostly because of the name. I don't understand what's cyber about them.
Again, right? It's like, if they were cyber, would they not be online? And again, I wouldn't have to see them in my beautiful city. They're disrespecting my wonderful place of living and employment and good times,
Didn't Trump on the White House lawn come out of a Tesla and say it's all computer? So they are cyber.
Everything is computer.
Vicky, they're very
honestly.
all computer. So
I think he thinks everything is all computer. So I don't take that feedback
computer?
from him.
No, in some ways, he is right. Unfortunately, Trump might be one of the great linguists of our time, not on purpose, purely accidentally, but he's brought things into the lexicon. Do you know how many times a day I say many such cases?
Same.
That's a Trumpism.
Oh, no. Is it really?
Many such cases is a Trumpism. He brought us that. They're not bringing us. They're not sending us their best. Donald Trump.
I'm part of the problem, is what I'm saying.
Speaking of problems we have and problems that are ongoing, Harrison, do you have something for us that you'd like to show some disrespect or some love to?
I think it's going to be disrespect. I feel like all of us, actually, Kady might be nice, so maybe she's going to.
I was going to be, but I think I'm changing my mind.
Yeah,
go forward.
See, this is the peer pressure of the podcast. Mine is just directed towards this single Instagram post from the Liberal Party a few days ago, days after Carney comes in, and they happily tweet. I have it here. Mark Carney got it done, and he canceled the carbon tax. And I'm like, guys, the gall. This was like the crown jewel, the policy crown jewel for years. You fought tooth and nail, including with your prime minister. This was the thing. This was what stood between us and, I don't know, the flames of climate change engulfing us all. And you use it, the destruction of your own policy, as your premier policy with the new prime minister. And, the criticism from the conservative side is just the frustration, and they see themselves as rooted to, I don't know, causes and beliefs, and they're immovable on some things you got to stand on. And they would say they see the Liberals licking their finger, putting it up to the wind. Where's the electorate going? And then just chasing that. So just the shamelessness of doing that, regardless of what you feel about the carbon tax. I just mean in terms of your approach about coming out of the gates and just throwing that into the mud, stamping on it, killing it, choking it to death.
It has like if Barack Obama had turned on Obamacare and just been like, Obama don't care.
Still calling.
Obama no longer care.
It's still calling it Obamacare.
Yeah, that's a great one. Thank you, Harrison. And Kady, what do you have for us?
So I think mine is somewhat similar to Lauren's in that it also is tangentially, or actually not even that, tangentially related to Elon Musk. I wish social media, and particularly Twitter/X, wasn't terrible. I miss when it wasn't terrible. I loved elections when I could go on it and I could actually follow news from local campaigns. I could keep track of party leaders. I could, see debates between people. I could offer like helpful process nerd stuff. I could do none of that anymore. It is just a sea of blue checks. You look at the reply column of anything and it's just like a descent into hell. It's just, layer upon layer of weird storylines and misplaced theories sort of transposed from the US to Canada. I miss it. I miss social media not being terrible. I miss Twitter being Twitter and not being terrible. And yes, there's Blue Sky, which is kind of getting there, but I don't think we appreciated enough when we had it, this incredibly simple, straightforward, minimalist platform that allowed everyone anywhere to report or comment on anything with a phone. No camera needed, none of that stuff. You could just like type something out. And honestly, I don't think we appreciated it enough, and I wanted to come back. And that is my lament.
And you were like one of the queens of Twitter back.
I love Twitter. Twitter was great.
Yeah.
I mean, I stopped like 3 or 4 years ago before it actually fell apart, but I still used it very much as someone who followed and who used it to sort of get a sense of what was happening out there. And I just can't do it anymore. And it bugs me.
Remember when you could T9 text to Twitter?
You could do anything. And all of that was deliberate because the whole idea was that they wanted to make it as easy as possible to get a message out. And then they started adding pictures and video. And that was, where it all started to go downhill probably. But it's a nightmare now. I go over and then I'm just closing the tab in horror in seconds because there is nothing useful for me there. And I miss it because it used to be useful.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you say that because I was in Kenya a couple months ago and folks there still using it the way we used to use it. Lots of like great political debate. I mean, there's stuff that's like not ideal, like people watching fights on there, but like if there's a social media site that runs video, people are going to watch people fighting on it. Yeah. That's just how that works.
And porn.
And porn. You're going to get porn and fights on any social media.
That is the other thing. I'm sorry. I have to go back to my thing. If you click on a trending topic, it doesn't matter what it is. You are going to see a penis in like 3 or 4 scrolls. Even if you don't want to see a penis. All the time. Do you ever click on trending topics? Click on Mark Carney. Tell me how many times you have to scroll down before you see someone's penis because it's not going to be long.
It's for his brand image, I think.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna cap us off with I'm gonna show some love to the iconic McBarge vessel, which unfortunately capsized this Wednesday in the Fraser River in Vancouver. So if you don't know, the McBarge is I'm going to read from the CBC News, is a 57-meter long barge that became iconic after being moored in False Creek during the World Exposition in 1986. It was basically a giant McDonald's restaurant at one point, and since then it has lain fallow. It has never had visitors. It's been largely derelict, but it has hung out on this river until Wednesday when it capsized. And I just wanted to shout out a queen, an icon, going down before her time. And we salute and we respect the great McBarge. Shout out to her.
Thank you for her service.
This show is a co-production with Relay Communications and yours truly. If you can, do me a favor, leave a review or a rating on whichever app you use. I want to know what you think about the show, but I also want to know in a public setting where you have to be nice to me. I've been Vicky Mochama. I am still on Twitter/X at @bmochama. You can follow the show on Instagram at PartyAllTheTimePod and on Blue Sky at partyallthetimepod.bsky.social. We also have a newsletter called Party All the Time, where you can get the show every week. And every Tuesday, for the duration of the election, I'll be on Real Talk with Ryan Jesperson every morning, chatting about the headlines, the hurts, the dramas, the confusions, who can get it, who can't get it that week. Make sure you listen.
You've been listening to Party All the Time, hosted by Vicky Mochama. Subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.